Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for sharing this, round table. I think it's a very gratifying, very rewarding to hear what other people have to say. I come from Complutense-Universidad in Madrid, and to a certain extent, I think there are certain features that we share. Bordeaux and Complutense, it's a big university. I think the teacher profile is somewhat similar in terms of language competence, also pedagogical awareness, etc. Also the students, and we've come into EMI at a later stage, right? And I'm, in fact, partly responsible for setting up teacher education there now. So we're right in the process of this revolution that you were mentioning. Joanne asked me to put this kind of controversial question up, okay? It is a fundamental question in all these programs, right? You talked about assessment, evaluation, and not actually looking into it. It's your first year, not looking into it enough. Some years ago, I was, like 6 or 7 years, I was contacted by the Dean of the Faculty of Business and basically said, we would like you to audit our program in English, our bilingual project, they call it, program. And I was like, panic-stricken, audit. He said, we need to see what's going on in terms of students' performance, how they're doing, what are their grades, really. So here, under student performance, I'm going to focus on their final grades. I know that in performance we can contemplate many other things. I know it's much more complex than just a final, summative grade, but for the time being, in this particular talk, I'm going to focus on this. Then if you want to raise other issues, I'll gladly join you, okay? So, I think I have far too many slides, but it doesn't matter. I'll just skip through the ones.
Whiz through them.
Okay. Things that have been studied, researched in, look at this terrible acronym, ICLHE. It stands for Integrating Content and Language in Higher Education. This acronym has been used, for example, especially in research contexts, where we actually try to, this was coined back in 2004 at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, and I don't know if you know about Bob Wilkinson in the Netherlands. He actually runs, well, not anymore, he's just retired, but there is a conference in Brussels about English medium instruction, okay? What is the difference between EMI and this unpronounceable acronym? EMI is English medium without focus on this idea of language integration, and ECL is basically including linguistic objectives in the syllabus, okay? So where are we? Are we halfway there? Are we not? But I mean, there are differences in terms of the terminological use. Okay, very quickly. Things that have been researched. For example, what foreign language competence do students have, or what are they aiming at, and what do teachers have? What about the classroom discourse? What's going on in the classroom? And Hilary can say a lot about that. Teacher and student attitudes. There's a lot of research, a lot about how students feel, how teachers feel, a lot about their perceptions, which is mostly what you presented. English medium policies. Some countries have developed specific policies, others have not. My university doesn't have a policy, which in itself is a policy, not having a policy. Okay, so it's something that we need to look into. English is a lingua franca. If you are familiar with the term internationalization at home, the idea that most teachers and students are locals, nationals, and therefore we're using English as a foreign language, but the moment we include other non-French speakers, international students, then we could talk about this lingua franca situation. And then student academic performance, which is what I'm going to focus on. Now, generally speaking, and every day things change because there's more and more research and interest, there's been very little research, okay? Now the question that I will kind of raise today is, will learning through a foreign language affect learners' academic performance in the subject, okay? In this particular case, I'm going to talk about business students, because as I say, my university, the business degree has been run through English for the last 6 years, so we have a little bit more experience and data there. Okay, the research is not extensive nor conclusive. So what we find is a bit of everything. In secondary, not tertiary, at secondary, what we find is positive findings. For example, in mathematics, we have research by Piet van der Krijn in the Netherlands, or we have geography by Voltmer and other people in Germany. We also have negative findings. In the use of relevant subjects, subject-based language, studies by Lim Falk, or reduced student participation. So not only are we looking at grades, these studies are looking at students' performance in class. So, students ask less questions. What you said about shyness. Students participate less. Well, we can look at it from different angles. So we have positive, negative findings, and other studies that say that there is no effect. For example, in the Netherlands, a very big study by Admiral et al., or in Finland, Jakinen, that say that there is no effect. The use of another language, of a foreign language, does not affect the final outcomes. Students perform in the same manner. What about tertiary? In tertiary, again, there is even less research. However, having said this, yesterday on the plane, I just received a paper for evaluation that was actually dealing with it. So the interest is there, and maybe we could talk at the end about why there's still scarce research. Okay, so there is no hard evidence. It's mostly, most of the times it's based on opinions and beliefs from different stakeholders, and mostly qualitative research. So, do you think they learn more? The teacher says, no, he's responsible for the course. You know, how can I say that? But other teachers say, well, yes, well, what do we understand by learning less? Because we're putting on the table lots of issues that don't really have to do with doing it in another language. It has to do with learning and teaching in general. The only thing that's, in my experience, is that EMI, or teaching through another language, has actually made it much more explicit and much more necessary to reflect upon. And then another thing that can happen is that the source of all evil is the English language, or using another language. Or they have problems because they're doing it in English. But, you know, teachers, we need to reflect about how we teach, and students have to reflect on what is their degree of responsibility in all this. Anyway, so we have conflicting findings. Nordic countries, for example, claim that there is certain loss of domain and L1 academic literacy. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work by John Airy and Glenn Hellikia and all these people that says, yes, there is a certain loss. Okay? And then other research says that subject knowledge and students' academic performance is unaffected. So what I'm going to present in a minute is the findings at my university and the business department. Can we actually take those findings to other contexts? Definitely not. I mean, all this learning is very much situated. But it raises issues about what is going on in evaluation, what is going on in assessment, how do we actually need to change that assessment or not? Okay? So the research questions in this study were the following, and I read them. It says, does the teaching and learning of content through another language have an effect on students' academic performance when compared to their counterparts' academic performance in Spanish? So at the Spanish university, or my university, we always have the possibility of having a bilingual strand, an English strand. I say bilingual because in the last year they do have quite a lot of subjects in Spanish. Okay? So we have the students that are doing it in English and the students that are doing it in Spanish. So we can compare those two groups. Sometimes we even have the same teacher teaching the two groups. Financial accounting in English, financial accounting in Spanish. Okay? That would be the situation. And then the next question is, does students' academic performance in English vary depending on the nature of the different subject courses examined? And by nature I mean some subjects that are more quantitative, like mathematics, and some that are more, if you want, qualitative, like economic history. And I put that in inverted brackets because I know it's much more complex than all this. Okay? So why this second question? Because when I interviewed students some years ago and I said, first year students, these are first year students, what are you expecting from your final grade? You know, where are you going to have more difficulty? Most students, I interviewed like 10, I kind of organized them by higher, medium, and lower achievers. They didn't know, they were lower achievers already. And I said, what are you, and they said, oh, I think we're really going to have problems with economic history because, you know, you have to, reproduce all these terms in English, you have to write these short essays and questions, and, you know, our English is still not, academic English is still not so developed. So they thought they were going to get lower grades in economic history, right? So, very quickly, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in the plenary, so just a little kind of glance at this. The idea of academic disciplines in the continuum, what I said 2 minutes ago about quantitative subjects and more qualitative. And basically what we've done to organize some of these subjects is use Bigland's continuum. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of the applied and the pure and the hard and the soft, or vertical and horizontal. Bernstein and Bigler, and also Jacobs in South Africa, that has conducted very interesting research with content teachers and language teachers, ESP. It's a little bit simplistic, but it works for our purposes. So we actually placed finance in one end of the continuum, between the vertical and the applied, and then accounting and economic history on the other end of the continuum between pure applied and horizontal or soft. Okay? So, I probably need to rush that very quickly to tell you about the data. So we have student academic grades, and this is something that is organized across the department. Everybody, all the teachers have to do the same, which, by the way, was something completely new in the department. For the first time, because they were conducting the bilingual degree, they had to organize assessment, and that they had to be much more specific about it. So they just coordinating how much was going to be allotted to coursework and final exams was a big issue in itself. I know if the same situation applies to France, but in Spain we're very individualistic, and okay, everybody has their own freedom to do what they want in the classroom and to decide on how they do this. So we have those 3 subject courses: financing or accounting, finance, and history. And the students, the students need, sorry, I should go back a minute. The students need to have a B2 level. That is compulsory in order to go into this course. Okay? It doesn't happen all the time, but they're required to have a B2 level to enter these courses. Okay? And then, very quickly about the UCM. This is the faculty, 6,000 students in the business department faculty. All subjects go to English. Students, well, not exactly all subjects. I said 4th year, not all of them. Students follow the same syllabus, that is important, in Spanish and in English. They often have the same teachers, and they follow equal assessment procedures. And by equal, I mean that 40 and 60%, and then it's not so tight. The student sample, as I said, B2 English. And then one thing that we did compare when looking at the Spanish data and the English data was the university access grade. And the students were academically very comparable. Because one of the things that they say is that people that go into these groups are better students, intrinsically. Isn't that right? They're highly motivated, responsible. So a lot of teachers want to teach these students because they're better students. Right? So that's a plus, okay? Apart from all the other work. But we actually compared, we made sure that they were comparable, academically speaking, right? So that the variable would be as much isolated as possible. Okay, and then what is it? 106 students was the final sample, okay? Right? And then you have the distribution there. Okay, the teachers, very quickly. Too quickly. The teachers, Spanish-speaking teachers, age between 40 and 50, no required certification for English, no required. Not yet, we will see, okay, that's a big thing. 3 teachers in EMI settings with international experience and different experiences. Studying abroad, having completed a PhD, but no specific training, not this group. The groups that are coming in now, the teachers do receive the training. Okay. And then the findings. I'm going rather quickly, but again, just to give you an idea. Okay, we compared the exams, and there are no statistically significant differences between the two groups regarding the three subjects. Okay. Now, surprisingly, against our initial hypothesis, students obtain high grades in the history course, both in the EMI and the non-EMI groups, followed by accounting and finance. Interestingly, because they did better than they expected. Now, I'm not going to throw, I could, but I'm not showing you the data for you, the people that know more about numbers. Then we also looked at the coursework and final grades to see, the differences in the components. Generally speaking, they do better during the course year than in the final exams. In the final exams, they drop, but that happens in most cases. That they do better, because it's much more broken up into smaller components, and then the final exam, oops, more difficult, right? Okay, discussion, which I think is really the more interesting part. Could there be disciplinary differences across subjects? For example, the history exam questions, which are more likely to require analysis and synthesis of course content, but also memorization skills. Now, if that's more demanding linguistically, why is it that students obtain high grades? So, question. And then accounting and finance are more problem-solving exercises, more multiple choice questions and practical reports, and they obtain low results. Now, could there be qualitative variation in teacher assessment criteria? Yes. Yes. Okay. Then when we compare, teachers' evaluation, or even our own evaluation after some time, it's not systematic, it's not consistent. So that's one of the difficulties we have here, but not only in EMI. Could there be cultural assessment habitus reproduced? And by this I mean, we might be teaching what you said about the framework not changing. We're teaching in English. We're probably using English written materials, like the people in finance use an American textbook, okay? But we're reproducing our assessment habitus in Spanish, the way we evaluate in Spanish. Sometimes it's even the same teacher. Why do our students sometimes when they go abroad to really international contexts obtain such or lower grades? Because they have to re-socialize into a different cultural scenario, if you want. So that might be why there are no differences. Also, can there be some kind of testing accommodation? In other words, do we give the teachers in this context said no, but do we give students that are doing it in another language some kind of support, which I don't think is bad. Huh? I mean, I'm not criticizing that. Are we allowing them, are we giving them more time? Are we simplifying some of the questions? Are we providing some kind of scaffolding, some kind of support? Are we letting them use Spanish? It's not in this case, but I've seen all kinds of measures implemented, and I think they shouldn't be discarded. I'm not being dogmatic about this by any manner. And I'm food for thought. Why is research on student academic performance in EMI context so scarce? Well, definitely I think there's a lack of standardized testing instruments. It's easy to compare language performance. We have the Common European Framework, but what about comparing how students work in financing or marketing here in Finland, in the UK, or in France? There are no standardized tests. Do we want them? I don't know, but I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's probably not easy to compare. Implementation is too recent to measure or evaluate the effects. Little interdisciplinary collaboration. That's one of the most valuable things, to work with people that come from other disciplines. It takes time. It takes a lot of time because you do things very differently. You write a paper. Then they write back and you say, what's happened? And then you change things, and then you send them over and they say, no, you don't do this in my discipline, So we have to kind of think outside that box. And then main researchers involved, as I say, are language specialists, and therefore we focus on language rather than content. That would be one of the reasons. So, further research, what are we doing now? Well, we're conducting longitudinal research, not just cross-sectional, longitudinal. We're following these students. First-year students are very different to last-year students, aren't they? I mean, they go through a university acculturation process. We need to include a wider variety of disciplinary courses, and now we have consumer behavior. analyze student outcomes in O2. What about academic literacy in L1? I mean, there's so much one could do. Provide some guidelines so that more specific assessment criteria are somewhat shared by teachers, or combined with qualitative study, which is what we're doing. And I think I'm done. Thank you very much.